this is where I wanted to start with. So before going forward, I wanted to just share some personal anecdotes. So I would tell myself, as Dr. Chamil also introduced, we have a computational biology research group at Peradeniya, and my research area is on computational biology. And this is how I would picture myself. Someone running with a computer after DNA sequences, asking them what are the secrets that they are holding. So to give you an idea about a sample question that I would be working on as a computational biologist, this is one example of a sample question that I would have to work on. It turns out our genes, which are made out of DNA, they hold certain information about genetic information about ourselves. And if you look at different cells, how strong these different genes are, that is different. So, for example, let's say this is a let's say this is a brain cell, and we have identified a set of genes, and also we have identified how effective, how much expressed they are at a given instance in a certain tissue. So this is like a sample data set I would get, and what we see here is that we have a set of tissues, 6 tissues, and I have measured gene expression levels. That means how much expressed they are at a given instance. And also I have run a diagnosis, and I have identified that, okay, in tissue 6, it belongs to a patient with a tumor. Now, my question is, how can I identify, is there a way that I can identify a set of genes so that I can differentiate between a normal tissue and a tissue with a tumor? So in that sense, now if we take this into the machine learning space, you can say that this is my data set. These are the set of samples, and these genes going from 1 to 5, they are my features, and this diagnosis, that is my class label. And if you look at this sample question, we only have 5 features and only 6 instances. But in the real world, what happens is, if you take a real example, usually DNA sequencing is a very expensive process. Therefore, we don't have the luxury of scanning a large number of samples, taking samples from large number of patients. So what we end up with is a less number of samples and a large number of features, because our genome is made out of a large number of genes. So in the real world, a question I would work on would look like something like here, what is shown in the below picture. And this is essentially, my data set is it made out of N samples and M genes with class labels. But in this case, my M, the number of features, that is quite large than the number of samples. So which makes it a difficult problem. And so essentially, what I'm trying to do is I am trying to screen through different genes, and I'm trying to find out some marker genes, some important features that can help me to differentiate between the 2 classes, the normal and the tumor class. And yes, as I said, in the real world, my M is quite large than the N. So my number of features are large than the number of instances. Now, when I'm trying to, that is an instance where we have to use a feature selection, because it is that problem itself demands for feature selection. If I could select the most important features, or the most effective features that can differentiate between the 2 classes, it means that I have identified a set of genes that can help me to differentiate between a normal cell and a tumor cell. So that's one example where someone like myself will be using feature selection. Also, interestingly, this table is coming from a publication that have compared different studies that have looked at chronic kidney disease data, and they have proposed a classification method to differentiate between a patient with chronic kidney disease and a patient without chronic kidney disease. And what you in the first row, that is the paper by myself, and in fact Imesh, who was by then a third-year undergraduate engineering student. And what this table tells is that our study, it has been able to perform this classification task with almost a perfect accuracy, but with only a certain number of features. Whereas there are some other studies also which have gone for high accuracy, but requires more number of features. If you look at in the real world, what this means is we can diagnose a patient by considering less number of features, which is very useful, because that means that the number of tests that we have to do for a patient to identify him or her as to identify whether that patient has a disease is now less. So this shows us the importance of the doing feature selection and how it can help our analysis, and also in our applications in a practical sense. So moving on, my focus today is to discuss with you about embedded methods for feature selection. And so far, we looked at two other methods. Those are filter methods and the wrapper methods. And as was highlighted by Dr. Chamila as well, if you consider, if you want to scale them based on or if you want to weight them, considering two different metrics as model performance and the computational complexity, what you would see is if what we are looking at is the model performance or the accuracy, the wrapper methods probably can give us a higher accuracy or high model performance compared to filter methods. But whereas if you look at the computational complexity, wrapper methods are would be more complex, and filter methods would be more straightforward to implement. And the idea in embedded methods is that we want to have, we are trying to achieve a win-win solution. And so we are trying to get the advantages of both filter and wrapper methods. And in embedded methods, the feature selection is embedded into the model training. As the name suggests, the feature selection is embedded into the model training. So if we look at how this aligns with the machine learning, typical machine learning project workflow, so what is the diagram in this diagram, the A corresponds to the filter methods, B corresponds to the wrapper methods, and the C corresponds to the embedded methods. So if you look at the filter methods, so just to summarize what we discussed so far, the idea is we do the feature selection in advance to training our machine learning model using some filter methods for feature selection. Whereas when we come to the wrapper method, the idea is we do a feature selection, and then we do the model training, and then we maybe go back and we do the feature selection again, and we select the best set of features. Whereas in the embedded method for feature selection, as shown in the last figure, feature selection is embedded into the model training. And what we do is our objective, we generate a subset of features, and the learning of the model training is also done as we learn the optimal a good set of features. And I thought of introducing two embedded methods for feature selection during this workshop. They are lasso method and the tree-based feature importance method. And before going into discuss about the lasso method, I would like to discuss a little bit about the regularization. So here, this is a picture showing some data set, and we are trying to fit a certain model, or we are trying to train a machine learning model so that we can predict a value for a given a new instance. And now the question is, which model will you prefer over the other? Now, if you look at what is shown in figure A, what we have fitted is a linear model, a simple linear regression. And it is actually, it's passing through only a few instances in our data set, which means that we are not achieving a good accuracy in this case. Whereas if you go to the figure C, what we have done is we have found a model, probably by increasing the complexity of that model, which can fit to almost all the data points in my data set. But what this would mean is, now I have, by increasing my model complexity, I have found a model that fit perfect for what I have in hand. But if I try to apply this model to a new instance, it might not work well. So that is what we usually call as overfitting. So it worked perfectly for my training data set, but when I try it on a new instance, it might not work well because now I have overfitted my model into my training data set. But in figure B, we are trying to achieve kind of a good balance between these two. And this is where regularization comes into the picture. So now, if you now in the figure 1, it's an underfitted model, and we don't want an overfitted model also. So how can we go from overfitted model to a good fit or a robust model? That is where we do the regularization. So the idea is we try to decrease the model complexity, as well as we try to shrink the coefficient of the features or the model parameters, the learned parameters, so that we can find a good model or a robust model. Because we know that let's say we have the learned parameters as very high in the range of thousands or 2000s, even if we do a small change to those parameters, the error, the change we see will be higher. That means for a new instance, the change we see would be higher. Whereas if we could shrink the coefficients of my features, the coefficients of the parameters, it will give us a more robust model, and error we see with new instances would be less. So there are two ways that we could go from overfitted model to a robust model. One way would be to reduce the model complexity. The other way would be to shrink the coefficients of the learned parameters. I must mention that what we are talking here about are actually the linear models. So there are two ways to perform regularization on linear models, ridge regression and lasso regression. And just for the completion of it, I thought we'll just discuss about ridge regression as well. So here, if you forget about this term with the lambda, what we are left with is the error function for normal linear regression. And now by adding a certain error term, which is again which includes all the coefficients of the features, the beta values, we are trying to regularize our model. And in ridge regression, what we are taking is the L2 norm, or we are taking the squared value of the coefficients of the parameters, and and by doing so, we can shrink the coefficients of the parameters, or we can shrink the coefficient of our features to smaller values. However, the ridge regression cannot make any of the coefficients. It will not result in the coefficients as 0. Whereas if we consider the lasso regression, where we have a similar loss function, but now instead of the squared of the coefficient, we are considering the absolute value of the coefficients of the features in my model. So in that case, we are using the L1 norm, and by doing so, we can make some of the coefficients of some of the features to 0. What that means is it's removing those features from my model. So thereby, we can do feature selection through lasso regression, because lasso regression, when trying to minimize this error function, it can lead to some of the coefficients of some of the features to 0, but then thereby it removes those features from my final model. And as you can see, it is embedded into the feature selection, because what I would end up is a set of what I would end up at the end is a linear model for either regression or a classification. But at the same time, I have identified a set of features also, which can give me better performance in this case. And if I spend a little bit time on this equation here, so we have, in addition to beta, which corresponds to the coefficients of the features, we also have a hyperparameter called lambda. Lambda, essentially what it means is it tells, it controls how much we shrink each of the, how much we shrink these coefficients of each feature. And lambda is a hyperparameter. It's not a parameter that we optimize for, whereas beta is a parameter. It's something we estimate in the model training, but lambda is a hyperparameter. That is something we have to decide before doing the before running the lasso regression. Okay. So also lasso stands for least absolute shrinkage and selection operator, because it performs shrinkage as well as it can do feature selection as well. And as we saw, it uses L1 norm. And to summarize, lasso regression facilitates feature selection by making some of the coefficients of some of the features to 0. But if you look at the workings of the lasso regression, what we see is it might not work well in the case where the number of features is greater than the number of training instances. For example, the very first example that I mentioned of, where we have a large number of features, but less number of instances. It's because of the nature of the loss function that lasso regression might end up resulting in some weird answers, but not really what we want. And also something we have to remember before performing lasso regression is that we have to do the feature scaling. Because in our data set, the features can be in different scales. Some can be in order of 10, or some can be in in 1,000, like that. But we must do the feature scaling and bring them all to the same scale before performing the lasso regression, because otherwise this adjusting the coefficients of these different features would not make sense. So before doing any form of regularization, we have to do feature scaling, and before doing lasso regression also, we have to perform feature scaling. So that is about using regularization to do feature selection. So we can use lasso regression method to select features. And the other embedded method for feature selection would be use of feature importance that can be calculated through the tree-based algorithms. So Sampasa did an example with introducing decision tree with an example. And what we see in a decision tree is we look at different ways to split the data, considering different features, and we select an optimal tree which can give us a good performance. And what we end up with is a tree where with a set of nodes, and each node holds a feature. And in a decision tree, the important features appear closer to the root of the tree, while unimportant features will go down and will appear closer to the leaves, or maybe if we prune the tree, they will not appear at all. And therefore, what we see is, okay, if the important features appear near to the root, what it means is, if I select the features near to the root, that means they are the important ones. So it can give me an idea which features are important to make a certain prediction or do the regression. The advantage with tree-based algorithms is that they require less data preparation, they're very straightforward to implement, and no feature scaling is necessary compared to the regularization-based method. Let's look at this with an example. It's the very famous problem of classifying iris flowers. And so this is an example decision tree that we might end up with. So here, our features are the petal length, the petal width, and those are the two features. And what it says is that, okay, I can go into the root. I see that if the petal length is less than 2.45, if it is true, I'm going to classify it as belonging to, it's a setosa flower. And if it is false, again, I'm going to check another condition for petal width. And as per this particular decision tree, petal length has come as the root, which means that that is the most important feature when making this decision. So how do we quantify the importance of the feature importance in a tree-based algorithms? There are different ways when we are building the decision tree. There are different criteria that we can consider to identify the best split of the features or the best split of the data. So here I have used the Gini index as that metric. So in a decision tree or any tree-based algorithm, the split can be done based on different metrics. For example, a metric like Gini impurity or entropy or information gain or variance. And Gini impurity, entropy, information gain, those are considered for a classification task, whereas variance is considered as a metric when building tree-based algorithms for regression tasks. And if we take, for example, the random forest, which is again a tree-based algorithm, there what we do is we essentially build forest of trees. Essentially, forestry is a collection of trees. So we develop a collection of decision trees, and we make the prediction based on those collection of trees, not only a single tree. And if you look at a random forest, intuitively we can say that the average depth at which a feature appears across all the features in the forest, that can be a notion of its importance, right? So in a decision tree, similar to how where the feature appears can be intuitively can tell us about how important that feature is. Similarly, in a random forest, the average depth at which a certain feature appears across all trees, that can give us an idea about the importance of that feature. So that is how, so those are two methods to embedded. Again, this is an embedded method because while doing the decision tree or while doing the random forest or while building it for classification, at the same time, we can get an idea about feature importance as well, and we can do feature selection. I also wanted to show quickly about how we can do these, perform these embedded methods for feature selection with Python. And if you could go to this link, I have shared a Google Colab link here. It's a bit.ly/FSML code. You can access my code. By the way, I wanted to ask from the audience, how many of you are familiar with Google Collaboratory? Can you raise hand? Anyone who is familiar with Google Colab? You can use the raise hand option in Zoom. Yes, I see a few hands going up. That's great. I see that there are a few hands that are going up who are raising hands. So let me make this like an opportunity to introduce, if there are anyone in the audience who is not familiar with Google Collaboratory, which is a very fancy tool, a nice to learn, nice to know tool, which was introduced, I think, maybe a couple of years before. Google Collaboratory allows us to run Python code at any time without having to worry about how to set up in the environment to run Python codes. So which is very nice. So you can, whenever you want to try out some Python codes, you can open up a Google Collaboratory notebook and you can try out those, you can do Python programming. And the other nice thing is it allows sharing. So you can work with teams, you can collaborate on Python codes that you are developing. And also it gives us the access to the GPU, the high performance hardware. So because we might not have the luxury of running our codes on Python codes on GPU, whereas a Google Collaboratory provides us that opportunity. If you want to try out, if you want to access.
Yeah, sorry for the inconvenience. I think there is some technical issue arose with Dr. Damayanti's connection. So up to now, actually, once she rejoined the session, if you have any question up to now, you can raise this question. So because other resource persons are available in the session, and you can use a chat box, or you can unmute your mic, and you can.
She has joined back, I think.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Where did you lost me? Did you lose me?
You can start with the call as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I said that I want to make this an opportunity to introduce the Google Collaboratory tool to everyone, which is a very nice tool which allows us to write Python code, without going to the hassle of setting up that environment. So I'll quickly go through my, and in fact, I have shared the link. It's bit.ly/FSML code. Quickly chat. Yeah, so it's the data set considered here is similar to what was used before. It's it's a housing data set, and yeah, I'll let you go through in your own time. And so what I have done is I have imported the data set and I have seen how it looks like. And before doing anything, I have to split it as train and test, and then I do some visualization. And something I see is average rooms and average bedrooms. Those two features correlates with each other a lot. And I have performed lasso regression. And after doing that, I have tried to visualize the coefficients that I ended up after doing the regularization. And it looks like that the coefficient of average rooms has become 0, which means that it's essentially been dropped from my feature set. And in fact, as we saw, average bedrooms and average rooms, they are highly correlated. So it makes sense to drop that feature. But again, some disadvantage with lasso regression is that we don't know which feature is going to be dropped in this in a case where there's a high correlation between features. And again, random forest feature importance, we can see we can visualize the feature importance and see which feature, and I have try to see what is the most important feature for this decision. So I'll let you go through in your own pace through this code, and I'll go back to my slides.